When Disney's Wish was first announced, I was hoping it would be a return to form, like the Disney Renaissance movies, and it feels like that is what they were going for, but after finally seeing the film for myself, I think it missed the mark, which is particularly disappointing because this is their 100-year anniversary as a company, originally founded in 1923, so there was a lot riding on this film, and seeing it fall short was unfortunate. The movie follows a young woman named Asha, who lives in a kingdom of Rosas, founded by their sorcerer king Magnifico. When a citizen turns 18, they give their king a wish, and every month he chooses a wish to grant, and everyone hopes that he'll pick their wish. At the beginning of the story, Asha is up for an interview to become the king's apprentice, so she could learn magic from him. All seems to be going well at first, but then King Magnifico shows her all the wishes he's gathered, and lets her know that he doesn't actually plan on granting most of these wishes, picking and choosing which wish to grant based on how he feels it will affect the kingdom, only granting wishes he's sure will benefit the kingdom overall, and if others are too vague, he thinks that they could be dangerous, so he ends up basically hoarding them. This bothers Asha, especially after finding out that he has no intention on granting her grandfather's wish, which is to inspire others. The king insists that the wish is too vague, like it could inspire the people to, say, revolt against him. Shocked and hurt by this new information, Asha decides that it's unjust for him to hoard these wishes, and decides they should be given back to the people, so she ends up leading a revolt against him, overthrowing their tyrannical king and returning everyone's wishes. Critics were not very impressed with this film, calling it uninspired nostalgia bait, and I have to agree with that. There were aspects that I did like about the film. I enjoyed the performances, even if I wasn't a huge fan of these characters, but the actors did a really great job. I think Chris Pine was pretty well casted. He played Jack Frost in Rise of the Guardians, but I felt like in that film he was miscast because the character is just too young. He's supposed to be a reckless and free-spirited teenage boy, and while Chris Pine's performance was fine, his voice itself just doesn't really lend itself to that kind of character, in my opinion anyway. But in this case, the character is much closer in age, so the match just works better in my opinion.
All I really want is just a little respect.
I hope the Yetis treated you well.
Oh, yeah. I love being shoved in a sack and tossed through a magic portal.
Also, he can carry a tune and sounds like he's having a lot of fun with it. And I enjoyed the rest of the cast too. The goat having a very deep voice despite only being 3 weeks old was a little jarring, but I understand they're playing it for a joke, so I'm more lenient towards it. Admittedly, I wasn't a big fan of this joke. I didn't even really think this character was that necessary to the narrative. I prefer when animal sidekicks don't talk and are instead very expressive, like Pascal and Maximus from Tangled, or Abu from Aladdin. But I think he was overall harmless, and I'm sure kids will like him. But I thought the movie had a lot of problems. First of all, character bloat was an issue. For example, Asha has 7 friends who are based off of the 7 dwarves from Snow White and the 7 Dwarves. But because there's so many, we don't really get to know any of them that well. And honestly, outside their gimmicks, they don't really have much personality. I didn't even get a good grasp on their names, and instead just called them by the dwarf they're based on. The only 3 that really made an impact were Doc, Sleepy, and Grumpy, and the others probably could have been left out entirely and not really lose anything. It felt like they were really only here for the reference and not actually to serve the narrative. Before I get to my thoughts on the rest of the cast, I do want to address all the references in this film. I understand since this year marks a huge milestone for Disney, they want to celebrate the history of the company, but all the references kinda came off more like corporate pandering than actually celebrating the art that Disney has given us over the years. Like, remember that joke in the live-action remake of Pinocchio, where they end up name-dropping Chris Pine?
We need a simple, strong stage name. Slab Oakley. Chad Log? I've got it. Chris Pine!
Yeah, there's actually a lot of that in this movie, and ironically, we get it from Chris Pine's character, and I just think this humor is a little cringy. I guess humor is subjective, but it's a little forced and on the nose. They also name-drop multiple characters, and this movie basically serves as an origin story for other Disney movies, but all these references just made me feel like I could be watching those movies instead of this. I get that Disney is pulling from the when you wish upon a star trope that they are famous for, for, but it would have been nice if the film had its own identity too. Maybe for their 100-year anniversary movie they could have pulled from another fairy tale, kinda get back to their roots, like maybe Red Riding Hood or something, or Jack and the Beanstalk. Oh wait, well maybe it's for the best that Gigantic got cancelled. Apart from Encanto, their latest outings just haven't been that memorable. Anyway, back to my original point about the cast. I think Asha's dynamic with her family wasn't well defined. First there's her mother, who doesn't really get to do much. Again, I think it's because of the cast bloat. We never even get to find out what her wish was, but at the beginning of the film she asks Asha to help make a cake for her grandfather since it's his 100th birthday, just like Disney. But Asha bails on them and is pretty secretive about why. She insists that she just has to give a tour, but she actually has that interview with the king, and I'm not sure why she chose to keep that a secret. Her family seemed really disappointed. Maybe it was because she was going to ask the king to grant her grandfather's wish, but then it didn't get granted, so now they're doubly disappointed. The last major cast members are the king and queen. King Magnifico was supposed to be a return to form for Disney, where they have a true blue villain, just like their classic stories, instead of the generational trauma or twist villains they've been doing in recent years. But it ended up being a real disappointment. He doesn't go full villain until about halfway through the movie. Before that, he has negative traits like being arrogant and vain, but he's also way too sympathetic. They allude to him having a tragic backstory where his home and family were all destroyed, so he learned magic to try to grant people's wishes and make them happy, and founded the Kingdom of Rosas, where everyone can be safe. And apparently they even live rent-free. Everyone seems to be happy overall, and they just openly welcome everyone. There are a few conditions, like the king is the only one who's allowed to do magic, so I'm not entirely sure why he's taking an apprentice. I guess it's okay because he's the one teaching them, but I'm not sure how that was supposed to make sense. But also when he takes the wishes, he erases it from their memory. He says it was to erase the burden of having to carry a wish, but it doesn't really seem to be out of malicious intent, as he doesn't seem entirely aware of the kind of effect it has on the people, where they end up losing a piece of themselves. The thing is, this probably could have been resolved through a conversation. He seems to be willing to hear people out, especially his wife, Queen Amaya. There's a point where he gets threatened by the star's presence, since only he should be allowed to have magic, so he wants to use dark magic to fight back, but Amaya's able to talk him out of it. He seems to suffer from paranoia, probably due to his childhood trauma that never got resolved, and the way he seems to process that trauma is to force himself to be in control at all times, otherwise he immediately gets defensive. He could probably just get some therapy, and I think that's what makes him a failure as a Disney villain. Characters like Scar, Ursula, Maleficent, they were all just evil from the get-go. Meanwhile in Wish, he eventually realizes that he can use the wishes to give himself more power, but he doesn't realize this until after he uses dark magic. He should have been doing this from the start. Instead, he turns evil because Asha kinda drove him crazy. During her interview, everything seems to be going well until she asks him to grant the wish of her grandfather. He gets really offended by this, since most people usually build a rapport and wait a few months before asking for a wish granted, and he feels like most people who apply for this job are just doing it to get something out of him, rather than because they want to genuinely learn something. After all this happened, Asha basically believes that she's burned all the bridges with the king, and pretty much sees him as tyrannical anyway, but instead of trying to patch things up with him, she decides to just break into his office and steal the wishes. Things just escalated really quickly. While the king definitely has issues that he really needed to work out, Asha just seemed like she was picking the most extreme reaction. It also didn't help that she didn't have much personality outside of being quirky and adorkable. She tries to justify her actions by saying that the wishes don't belong to him and they belong to the people, which I could see where she's coming from, except the people did give them to him willingly. Maybe they could have had her just try to talk to him, but then it turns out he actually is aware of everything that's going on and that he's hurting people, so he could be a proper villain. On top of that, according to concept art for the movie, Amaya was originally planned to be a villain too, so we could have gotten this cool Disney villain power couple. That would have been amazing. We were robbed. According to the concept art, the star was also supposed to be a shapeshifter, which I think could have been interesting too. The design we got is very cute. It basically looks like a Luma, but it also comes off as a cutesy animal sidekick, even though it's not actually an animal, but you get the idea. idea. Maybe if they'd kept the idea of it being able to shapeshift and talk, would have given it more personality. I was also a little confused with how the star operates. It seems offended when Asha asks it to grant a wish, but when it was interacting with Valentino, it seemed like it granted his wish. The first thing he says is it didn't work, because he was disappointed when he thought that he couldn't talk.
It didn't work. When does the magic happen?
And it goes on to make the other animals and plants around them talk, along with performing other feats of magic. So does it just not grant human wishes? Also, wasn't this movie based on the when you wish upon a star aspect of Disney, but then the wishing star doesn't grant wishes? I understand the whole work towards your wishes yourself, which I think is a good message. I just think some aspects of this film could have been better defined. In the end, I think that Wish focused so much on references and setting up other Disney properties that it ended up struggling to find its own identity. On top of my issues with the story, I also had problems with the animation and music. The music itself isn't bad, but they used the pop style instead of actual musical theater, and I just would have preferred to see the latter in the movie, or hear it. Meanwhile, the animation is going for a blend of 2D and 3D, but it ultimately just looks unfinished. There was reportedly a lot of corporate meddling behind the scenes, and the whole movie just feels like it's dripping with it. So a pretty disappointing outing for such a momentous anniversary, but that's my opinion. What do you guys think? Did you like Wish? Do you think I'm being too hard on it? Let me know in the comments below, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching everyone, I really appreciate it. Before I go, I want to give a shout out to the channel members. Tyrant Carnivore, Shiny Orc Boy, General Bolivar, Depth Charge Media, Samaru163, Gabby Hime, Verdant Range, JVR, Hussyman42, Nixel, Phil C, Taylor Ramirez, Caleb Nelson, Dakari the Professor, Equestron, Norman Sweetcream, Way Beyond Coincidence, Garcia XV Legend, Hunter Rose, 80s Nostalgia Guy, Felix Spam, Soundboy00, Kitsune Fiora, Lucas Geist, Jay Draws, Blue Spirit, Bandito Bane, Meowsers, Sky, JinKZ, Philip, Stutania, Isaac Martinez, Miyamoto Naosugi, and Data Dine Executive. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. If you want to become a member, you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button. We also have Buy Me Coffee if you want to support the channel that way. And if you enjoyed this content, I'd appreciate it if you left a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, and that part's free. Thanks again everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.